Since the two of you are investors, many of the people here may not necessarily understand how the investment world works. Do you want to give a very brief introduction to what you do and what your companies do?
Good afternoon, and thank you, Prajakt, for that. My name is Nirav. I was recently with...
You might need to hold it a little closer.
Better now? So my name is Nirav. I work with education-focused private equity firm called Kaizen. We make education investments in India and in Southeast Asia. We invest across the board. We invest all the way from pre-K to higher education and skilling institutions. We invest in brick and mortar, physical people amongst us who have run schools themselves. I was the CEO of Tata Classes and Tata Interactive Systems till about 4 months back when I joined Kaizen. And it's great to be here. I think I have never been pampered at any other education conference as I have been here. Wonderful seeing a lot of familiar faces as well. So,
if you want to give a flavor of some of the investments that you may have made, what are the kind of companies that you've invested in? And what is the quantum of capital typically a private equity firm would invest in?
So, like I said, we've invested across the board, but we've lent support to schools. We've given them venture debt. We've given them structured capital. We've invested in higher education institutions outside India. We've invested in organizations like Founding Years, which runs a pre-K chain. They have about 110 centers now. We've invested in a company in Hyderabad that provides very high-end programs in things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, fintech. We've also invested in Vardhana, which is a sort of a microfinance provider to affordable and budget private schools in southern and other parts of the India. Our typical check size, so to speak, could be anywhere up to $15 million, so up to about 100 crore rupees. But we've also made fairly smaller investments, so to speak.
Imran?
Thank you, Prajakt. So I'm with a private equity investment firm called Gaja Capital. We were set up 13 years ago. We manage $500 million under management in 3 funds. Our third fund is a $240 million fund. We typically invest $15 to $40 million in return for what we call a significant minority stake, which is owning a third of a business or more, and in some cases owning a controlling stake in these companies. We invest in 3 sectors: education, financial services, and consumer. But education has remained our largest investment area of focus for the last 13 years. We've invested across the board in education. Test Prep, a company called Career Launcher. We've invested in preschool education through a company called EuroKids and Kangaroo Kids that run 1,000 preschools across the country. We've invested in K-12 core education through our brands Euroschools and Billabong High. We've also invested in ancillary service providers to schools. So for instance, EduSports, which operates in 1,000 schools, helps schools to run their physical education programs with trained coaches, curriculum, and props. We've also invested in core learning outcomes, a company called Educational Initiatives. Some of you in your schools, your students might have taken the asset test or MindSpark that helps students learn mathematics. We've also invested in that company.
Great. So, folks, while a number of businesses here, or schools or education companies here, may be potential investing companies for them, the intent of this forum, of this panel discussion is not to talk about the investment side. But because investors typically have a ringside view of all the innovation or the newer concepts that are coming into the industry, what we are going to explore today is what are the kind of new things that these people are seeing that many of us may not necessarily be privy to, and what do they think, where do they think that some of these concepts are going to go forward. Typically, investment firms have a thesis in the sense they have a view on where the market is likely to go and how the market is going to shape up. And a lot of their investment decisions are based on their perspective about where the market is going. So, Imran and Nirav both, I'm going to request you to share your investment thesis, which should probably give all of us a view on where the investment world is seeing the education system change.
Thank you, Prajakt. So, we've looked, like I said, across the board in education, but the largest amount of capital and our focus has gone into the K-12 system. And we've invested, like I said, in core K-12 schools, but also in ancillary products and services. So let me talk a little bit about the ancillaries. See, there are two broad areas in which we see a lot of opportunity for innovation. One is in driving core learning outcomes. There are a lot of companies now called EdTech companies across the world that have attracted significant amounts of capital. But the fact is that, our view is that the learning crisis cannot be solved by building the Amazon or Netflix or even Uber of education. But actually what the learning crisis needs is a Google Maps of education, which is to use data analytics, evidence, and understanding of the student to know where the student is today, to very clearly map out where you want to go or your destination, and then give the most effective path to get there. And so there are several companies with this philosophy. It contrasts with the other philosophy, which is there are several companies that are investing significant amounts of capital to create essentially videos and all kinds of content and dishing them out in some personalized way to students like a Netflix or Amazon Prime would do. But our belief and our investment thesis is to pursue the former suite of solutions.
Which is using technology for better personalizing the outcomes that will come in. These are the kind of technologies that you're investing in.
Exactly.
And would it necessarily have to be technology enabled, or would it be, or do you see scope for things that may not necessarily scale up because of lack of technology, but are more one-on-one as well? There were some interesting conversations earlier, and one very interesting point that somebody made was we're using technology now to go back to the root of which is individual learning. How do you see this entire thing panning out? Is technology a key ingredient of what your investment thesis is? Or do you have scope for other alternate forms of learning based on the core theme of personalization?
No, I agree with you. Let me take an example. There's a friend of mine who recommended a very interesting book called The Empty Space. It was written by Peter Brook, who was a very renowned theater personality. And someone asked him, what's at the heart of good theater? Is it the stage? Is it the lighting? Is it, how you sell? Is it the story, the script? And he said at the heart of good theater is the relationship between the actor and his audience. And that's very true for healthcare, where the heart of healthcare is the relationship between physician and patient. And it is exactly the same, in education, because at the heart of education is this relationship. And someone in the previous panel mentioned that, and I think you're bang on. That is at the heart of education. And so if technology allows you to augment that relationship, that's a great model. On the other hand, technology is necessary but not sufficient.
Any examples you want to throw in terms of how this relationship between a student and learner, a teacher and learner, are getting augmented by technology? Any trends that you're seeing here, or any concepts that you're seeing here that you think are promising? Or any concept that you've come across internationally as well, which might be interesting for this audience to consider?
Should I take it? So, in a company that we recently invested in, they have a product called MindSpark. Now, MindSpark is essentially a personalized, technology-enabled learning engine for students. Now, at its very core is, technology that allows a student to, through questions and answers, learn mathematics. But what really creates the learning outcomes is when the student goes to class prepared after MindSpark. He's able to then raise the bar on his skills in mathematics. And that's a good example, I think, of building on a prepared mind, because you couldn't possibly do that with 30 kids in a class.
Right. So you're saying that technology can be an enabler, but the services and the other aspects that you build on top of the technology will actually make a big difference rather than just introducing a technology as a concept. Nirav, what's the investment thesis of your firm? What are the kind of big trends that you see, and what are the areas that you're putting your bets on in terms of things that are likely to get adapted into India?
So our thesis is based on the fact that, at the intersection of two very conflicting trends, there are some very interesting opportunities that are arising. On one hand, there is a fairly widespread dissatisfaction with the status quo as far as education is concerned. Most of the stakeholders in education recognize that there is a need for change. And that need for change is becoming all the more pressing as the societal context around education is changing. It's no longer, for example, about just degrees, because degrees no longer ensure employment. It's more about having the right kind of skills. So on one hand, there is this whole urgency to bring about a change. And at the same time, education as a subject has changed very slowly over the last 5,000 years. So as they say, there have been only 4 fundamental disruptions in the world of education. The first was the invention of writing, the second was the movable type, the third was the printing press, and now there is the whole internet. And every time there was a disruption, it took a long time for the society to accept that. So writing got invented in 3200 BC, and yet Socrates in 500 BC said that writing spoils the dialogic process of learning and actually spoils your memory. So therefore writing is not good. Thank God he had a disciple called Plato. He wrote down everything that Socrates said, and we therefore know what Socrates said. Right? Likewise, when the movable type came, the movable type allowed reprinting of the religious documents at a much faster pace with a lot more ease. And as a result, scriptures like the Bible were becoming far more easy to reproduce. And actually the authorities were against that. They thought that the hoi polloi cannot have access to all these religious scriptures. When printing press came, there was proliferation of novels. And these days, what do we tell our children? Put your phone aside and go and read a novel. When novels actually came about, parents were dead against children reading novels. They didn't want children to read novels. People had to hide the novel in a coat pocket because the society had censored the reading of novels. And the logic used was novels actually make you susceptible to sexual predators. Exactly what we tell our children when today they're using the mobile phone. So on one hand, there is a pressing need to bring about a change, and at the same time, education as a subject changes very slowly. And at the intersection of these two conflicting trends is where we see very interesting opportunities arise. What do I mean by that? So if technology or any form of advancement is actually used to solve problems which don't even arise or are not even felt by the educator, then that technology or that advancement is going to be rejected by the system. And technology, for example, is not just about recording the offline process and making it online. So just because there is audio video created and there are lectures being recorded, that's not technology. But yes, there is a need. So the traditional form of education has always felt the need of creating classroom of one, to be able to give that same personalized attention to a child that was possible during the days of the Gurukul. And that today, fortunately, even with larger class sizes, is possible thanks to technology and the power of data analytics and the growing power of the processor, which is able to process a lot more information at a far faster pace. And that allows a teacher to far more accurately track the progress that a classroom has made. So one of our companies, Imparters, for example, what they do is and this is going back to the traditional issue that we all face around availability of high quality teachers. So that's a problem that we all face, and then we get into this loop of how do we solve that issue, because unless teaching becomes a desired or a sought after profession, teachers would not be the best individuals to come into teaching profession, and that won't happen unless you pay great salaries and so on and so forth. But what these guys do is they're actually using sophisticated artificial intelligence. They're recording what the teacher's doing, and using that recording, they're able to gauge the effectiveness of a teacher. So in terms of what is the speed at which the teacher is speaking, or how much of interactivity is the teacher encouraging in the classroom? Is it only the teacher speaking, or also the students are getting a chance to speak? Or what is the kind of diction that she uses in the class? Or what is the extent of multimedia usage? Is it too little, too high?
Is that, Nirav, is that an automated system? Or how
Yes.
I think the entire audience accept that there are innovations out there that might be interesting to experiment with. I think in some ways everybody has been teaching to the converted here. What would be your top 2 or 3 trends that you're seeing that might be interesting for schools in India to experiment with? I'm not using the word adopt because I think there will be some level of experimentation that will go in. I think the bell has done, so I think we've got no more than 3-4 minutes. But if you can both summarize, what are top 2 or 3 things that you would encourage schools to experiment with from a technology or innovation point of view?
So I think as we speak today, technology is far ahead of the adoption by schools. So a lot of the things which may sound mundane, if adopted with a lot more rigor, could lead far better results than actually inventing newer technologies. So even things like the standard workflow tools that are available, things like being able to process the assessments and provide the teachers accurate feedback of where each student stands on his or her ability to grasp, that itself would be very valuable.
So again, hold on, because the both of you are saying the same thing. You're saying that personalization, understanding the student better, and now you're saying that there are tools available that will assess whether the teacher's approach to a particular student is right, and more importantly, there are tools that will artificial intelligence enabled and other technologies enabled, which will help you assess the child a lot better than a generic assessment.
So that is
any examples, specific examples of these kinds of technologies being used successfully somewhere?
There are a lot. What's happening, unfortunately, is that today these tools are bypassing the school system, and they're reaching out directly to the students because.
Thank you so much.